The salt spray tasted of ghosts. Not the ethereal, mournful kind, but the residue of forgotten things, of lives lived and lost to the relentless churn of the sea. The island, known locally as Aethel's Tear, a name whispered with a peculiar blend of reverence and dread, rose from the gray Atlantic like a jagged tooth, perpetually shrouded in a damp, clinging mist. It wasn't a welcoming place. The wind, a constant, keening presence, seemed to carry the lament of centuries, and the basalt cliffs, scarred by the endless assault of waves, offered no solace. Old Man Hemlock, the last ferryman willing to brave the currents around Aethel's Tear, had warned Elias Thorne. "She doesn't give up her secrets easily, that island. Best leave the past buried, lad. Some things are best left undisturbed." Hemlock, a man carved from the same granite as the island itself, had spoken with a gravity that unsettled Elias, but his academic curiosity, a relentless, almost obsessive drive, had overridden any apprehension. He needed to see it for himself. Elias, a scholar of forgotten lore at the University of Northumbria, specialized in the intersection of myth, archaeology, and the elusive concept of resonant landscapes, places where the veil between worlds seemed particularly thin. He wasn't a treasure hunter, nor a believer in the supernatural, but he possessed an almost preternatural ability to sense the echoes of the past, to feel the weight of history pressing down on certain locations. And Aethel's Tear, according to the fragmented texts he'd been studying for the past 5 years, was a place steeped in an exceptionally potent history. The texts, primarily excerpts from a lost chronicle known as the Cartography of Shadows, spoke of a structure on the island, not a castle, not a temple, but something other. The descriptions were vague, almost deliberately obscured, referring to it as a stone sentinel, a beacon against the dark, and a convergence of currents. The chronicle hinted at a power associated with the structure, a power that had both protected and consumed those who had sought to harness it. Elias had dismissed much of the chronicle as fanciful embellishment, the product of a medieval imagination prone to exaggeration. But certain details, particularly the recurring motif of resonant frequencies and harmonic alignments, had resonated with his own research into the principles of resonant landscapes. He'd discovered similar concepts in ancient Celtic mythology, in the architectural designs of megalithic structures, and even in the acoustic properties of certain caves and canyons. He'd spent years piecing together the fragmented clues, tracing the origins of the chronicle back to a remote monastery on the Scottish coast. The monastery had been abandoned centuries ago, destroyed by a fire that had consumed its library and erased much of its history. But Elias had managed to recover a few surviving fragments, painstakingly translating the archaic script and deciphering the cryptic symbols. The fragments had led him to Aethel's Tear, convinced that the structure described in the chronicle was not merely a legend, but a tangible reality. He needed to see it for himself, to feel its presence, to understand its purpose. The island was even more desolate than he'd imagined. A narrow, rocky beach offered the only landing point, and the climb to the interior was treacherous, requiring a careful negotiation of loose scree and crumbling cliffs. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the cries of seabirds and the relentless crashing of waves. He'd brought minimal supplies, a backpack containing a tent, sleeping bag, some rations, a notebook, a camera, and a portable recording device. He wasn't planning on staying long, just long enough to document the structure and gather some preliminary data. As he ascended, he noticed something peculiar about the landscape. The rock seemed to hum with a subtle energy, a faint vibration that resonated deep within his bones. He checked his recording device, hoping to capture the phenomenon, but the readings were inconclusive. It could have been his imagination, a trick of the wind, or simply the effect of the isolation. He pressed on, following a faint, overgrown path that led towards the center of the island. The path was barely discernible, almost as if the island itself was trying to conceal its secrets. He passed by a few crumbling stone walls, remnants of what might have been ancient dwellings, and a weathered stone circle, its purpose long forgotten. The air grew colder and the mist thickened, obscuring the landscape. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that he was being watched. He scanned the surroundings but saw nothing. It could have been his imagination, fueled by the isolation and the eerie atmosphere. Finally, after hours of arduous climbing, he reached the center of the island, and there it stood. It wasn't a castle, not a temple, not anything he'd expected. It was a structure built from dark, basalt stone, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. It wasn't imposing, not grand, but subtly powerful, radiating an aura of ancient mystery. About 30 feet high and 20 feet in diameter, with no visible doors or windows. The surface was covered in intricate carvings depicting strange symbols and geometric patterns. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran his hand over the cold, rough stone, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The carvings seemed to writhe and shift before his eyes as if they were alive. He activated his recording device, hoping to capture the structure's energy signature. The readings were off the charts. The device was detecting a powerful electromagnetic field, far stronger than anything he'd ever encountered. He circled the structure, examining the carvings in detail. They weren't like anything he'd ever seen before. They weren't based on any known language or culture. They seemed to be geometric expressions of sound, visual representations of harmonic frequencies. He noticed something peculiar about the structure's orientation. It was aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions, and its axis pointed directly towards the North Star. It was as if the structure was designed to harness the energy of the cosmos. He spent hours documenting the structure, taking photographs, making sketches, and recording his observations. He felt a growing sense of excitement, a feeling that he was on the verge of a major discovery, but he also felt a growing sense of unease. The structure seemed to be watching him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being observed, scrutinized by something ancient and powerful. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the island, he decided to set up his tent nearby. He needed to rest, to gather his thoughts, to prepare for the next day. But as he lay in his tent, listening to the wind howling around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. He felt a presence, a subtle energy that permeated the air. He closed his eyes, trying to dismiss his fears. But as he drifted off to sleep, he heard a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to come from the structure itself.
You should not have come here.